Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking what usually feels like a pretty dry, boring list of railway rules, and we're totally transforming it into your ultimate, high-stakes driving survival guide. Because, let's be real, when you're behind the wheel, very few situations command the kind of immediate, absolute respect as rolling up to a railway crossing. This isn't just about checking a box to pass some driving test. We're talking about sheer physics and the strict rules literally designed to keep you alive.
So, let's kick things off with a rather terrifying number, 1 kilometer. Why is a railway crossing so vastly different from a regular road intersection? Well, it all comes down to basic physics, right? A train is massively larger than your car, it's barreling down the tracks at incredibly high speeds, and here is the crucial part, it literally cannot swerve to avoid you. But the real kicker? A train's braking distance can stretch up to a full kilometer. Think about that. By the time a train driver actually spots your car sitting on the tracks, it is already way too late. They are a massive, totally unstoppable force.
And honestly, that brilliantly illustrates the exact mindset you need to have. There's this chilling quote from our source material that perfectly captures how these road rules were written. A collision with a train is so serious that the lawmakers never want you to feel completely safe when crossing a railway. Wow! Let that sink in. Lawmakers deliberately place the absolute responsibility to be on high alert squarely onto you, the driver. They never, ever want you to let your guard down or fall into a false sense of security. Because the stakes are literally life and death, the total responsibility for a safe crossing is entirely yours.
Now, keeping all of that in mind, imagine you're rolling up to an intersection and you see flashing white lights. Your first instinct might be to think, awesome, it's totally clear, I'm good to go. But wait, that is a super dangerous trap. Those white lights, they only exist to make the crossing visible to you from a distance. They absolutely do not mean it's safe to just cruise on through. You are always, without a single exception, obliged to give way to trains. So even if there are 0 red lights flashing, you still have to personally double-check and verify that those tracks are completely clear before you cross.
All right, moving right along to Section 1, reading the distance signs.
Now that we've really established the supremacy of the train and our heavy responsibility as drivers, let's put you right in the driver's seat. As you're driving down the road approaching the tracks, you're going to spot a yellow rectangular sign with 3 red slanted bars on it. So, pop quiz time. Does this 3-bar sign mean you're at the furthest possible distance from the crossing, or does it mean you're at the shortest distance practically touching the tracks?
Well, if you guess the furthest distance, you hit the nail right on the head. You're absolutely correct. This sign actually kicks off a highly structured countdown system designed to prep you for what's ahead. The sign with 3 bars pops up first. Then, as you keep driving and get closer, you'll spot a sign with 2 bars, meaning you're at 2/3 of the distance. And finally, a sign with just 1 single bar warns you that you've hit the final third of the distance to the level crossing. It's basically your visual cue to start getting your car and your mind totally ready for the tracks.
Which brings us to Section 2, crossing based on visibility. Okay, so you've tracked the countdown markers and you are finally at the crossing itself. But here's the thing, how you actually maneuver your car over those tracks isn't some rigid one-size-fits-all rule. It actually depends entirely on your environment. Making a safe crossing requires you to follow 3 sequential, super logical steps. Step 1, instantly get an idea of your visibility. Do you have a nice, clear line of sight all the way down the tracks, or are there big trees and buildings blocking your view? Step 2, you have to adapt your speed directly based on what you can actually see. And step 3, once you've adjusted, you execute the crossing safely. Let's break down exactly how that plays out in different conditions.
The rules for this are highly specific and just incredibly practical. Let's say you've got good visibility. Well, you might not need to slow down much at all. You just look both ways in good time and keep your speed up. But remember, railway tracks are pretty uneven, so if you're cruising faster than 70 kilometers per hour, you still need to slow down a bit just to safely navigate those bumps. Now, if your visibility is limited, you need to slow down, look both ways, and definitely shift down to a lower gear before you cross. Why? Because that lower gear gives your engine a lot more power and prevents you from stalling right there on the tracks. You actually want to accelerate just a tiny bit as you drive across. And finally, what if you have poor visibility, meaning you literally cannot see if a train is coming until you're right on top of the tracks? In this case, you must come to a dead, complete stop before the crossing. Look both ways, put your car in first gear, and drive all the way across. Do not even think about changing gears until your car is entirely on the other side. This absolutely guarantees you won't fumble a gear shift and stall when it matters the most.
And speaking of that, let's jump right into Section 3, stalling on the tracks.
Let's play out an absolute worst-case scenario. What on earth do you do in a high-tension emergency where, despite doing everything perfectly, your engine completely dies right on the rails and you're suddenly a sitting duck? The psychology of panic is absolutely your biggest enemy here. Imagine your engine restarts, but those crossing barriers have suddenly dropped down around you. Your first instinct might be to slam on the brakes, stop, and feel totally trapped. But don't panic. The rules clearly state that these barriers are deliberately made from a very thin material. They are explicitly designed so that you can drive straight through them. If your engine is running, put your foot down and bust right through that barrier to get off the tracks.
But what if your car just absolutely refuses to start? Well, here are some literal life-saving mechanical hacks depending on what you're driving. If you're in a manual car, release the clutch, turn the key as far as you can in the ignition, and just hold it there. On a lot of cars, this will force the starter motor to literally push your car forward, jerking you safely off the tracks. But if you drive an automatic, or if that starter motor trick just isn't working, you really only have one option left. Slam that transmission into neutral, get out of the car, and physically push it off the tracks yourself.
Now, obviously, the absolute best survival tactic is just straight-up prevention. You should never, ever find yourself stuck on the tracks in the first place. You are strictly prohibited from driving onto a crossing if the traffic is queuing up ahead of you. If there's even a tiny fraction of a risk that you'll be forced to stop and sit stationary on those tracks, you must wait behind the line. Only proceed when the car in front of you has moved far enough forward that your entire car will easily clear the crossing.
All right, let's look at Section 4. When can you overtake?
So let's shift gears for a second. Let's say you've crossed safely, but now you're stuck behind someone driving incredibly slowly right at the crossing. This brings us to the strict and admittedly kind of bureaucratic but highly necessary rules of overtaking near a railway. As a general baseline rule, overtaking another vehicle in conjunction with a level crossing is strictly prohibited. The danger of a massive train approaching while you're hanging out in the opposing lane is just way too high. However, lawmakers have carved out a few very specific, very important exceptions to this rule where overtaking is actually allowed.
It all builds into a really logical system to help you figure out when it's safe to pass. First off, you are allowed to overtake all vehicles if the crossing actually has physical barriers. You are also allowed to overtake all vehicles if the crossing is controlled by your standard red, amber, and green traffic signals. But if neither of those safety measures is there, so no physical barriers and no standard traffic lights, then the prohibition is in full effect, and you are only permitted to overtake two-wheeled vehicles, so things like motorcycles or bicycles.
The totally crucial point here is knowing how to read your signals. Take a good look at the difference between these lights. A standard red, amber, and green traffic light, exactly like the ones you see at any normal city intersection, is totally sufficient to override the overtaking prohibition. If you see that setup, you can go ahead and pass safely. But what about those flashing red railway lights that look like two glowing eyes? Yeah, those are not sufficient. If you only see the flashing red railway lights, that overtaking prohibition remains strictly in place. No passing allowed.
Okay, let's bring this all the way back to that super high-stakes scenario we were talking about earlier. If you stall out, if all your cool mechanical hacks fail, and you absolutely cannot move that car off the tracks, your final desperate move is to immediately abandon the vehicle and call emergency services at 112. You have to warn them so they can try to halt any oncoming trains. We kicked off this explainer by talking about the completely unstoppable 1-kilometer braking distance of a train and the stark reality that lawmakers wrote these rules specifically so you never feel completely safe. So I'm going to leave you with this. Knowing the sheer, terrifying power of a train, and knowing that every single ounce of responsibility for avoiding a collision rests right on your shoulders, are you truly prepared to take on that heavy responsibility the next time you approach those tracks?